Hello and welcome to the Global Leadership Podcast, where leaders of all sorts come to grow and expand their influence in healthy and holistic ways. I'm Whitney Putnam, your host of Season 8 at the podcast here at the Global Leadership Network. We are so glad that you are joining us. We have a ton of interviews coming up in Season 8. It's going to be such an exciting season. But first, I wanted to pause. So we are just coming off the Global Leadership Summit. And we actually I had the opportunity with a little behind the scenes moment with Craig Groeschel and Joe Saxton, where just fresh out of the summit, as their minds are still turning over exactly what content they were taking in, how they were learning, I got to sit down and have a conversation with them. And that is the conversation that this community gets a little bit of a sneak peek on. And so I'm thrilled to actually have you guys get to listen into that conversation. So if you don't know who Joe Saxton is, she's the founder of the Ezra Collective, an initiative dedicated to investing in women leaders around the world. She currently serves as the executive director of the 25, a leadership development initiative at Bethel University. And she lives in Minneapolis and co-hosts the Lead Stories podcast, a weekly conversation on leadership and life. Additionally, she's written several books, most recently, Ready to Rise. Also, she can really rock a red blazer, in case you're watching this on YouTube. Now, Craig also sat down with us, and Craig is globally recognized as a leader of leaders. He's the founder and senior pastor of Life Church. He's the host of the top-ranked Craig Groeschel Leadership Podcast, and he's a New York Times best-selling author. His latest book is Think Ahead: 7 Decisions You Can Make Today for the God-honoring life you want tomorrow. So this community, this podcast community, we are going to get to have a sneak peek of exactly what these leaders were thinking post-summit. And before we jump into that conversation, we would love it if you went and you liked or rated or subscribed to this podcast. When you do that, it's a way to help us spread this leadership content to leaders everywhere. Let's go ahead and jump right into our conversation. Okay, we are in for a really special treat. We just came off of the Global Leadership 2024, and I am here with Craig Groeschel and Joe Saxton to hear all of their thoughts. So welcome to the GLS podcast.
Thank you very much.
We're so glad to have you guys.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for being here. So we're just going to jump in. Okay. Literally, we're coming off minutes off the summit.
We are.
Yes. And we're so glad to hear you. I'm just going to kind of pick your brain as to what you saw and felt and experienced over the past 2 days. Sound good?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Great. Thanks for being here. So, Craig, to start off, I'd love to hear about a few of the high points from this year. What surprised you?
It's hard to pick high points. I would say day one, thinking about the frequencies of communication was a really interesting concept from Erwin, because I tend to take things very much at face value. And if you tell me something, I generally just kind of take the words and tend to believe them. And so thinking about what someone else might mean from it was helpful. Day two, Will's talk on hospitality, I think is a universally important topic. I think I'd already read his book and was a fan, and hearing it again, seeing him embody the value of loving people with hospitality was special. The book Strength to Strength by Brooks was just kind of pivotal for me. So hearing him, watching him deliver it was amazing. And then Buckingham bring it home with the value of love in the workplace, to take a word that does sometimes seem almost like, that's for a different category, and incorporating that into our leadership is, we were talking beforehand, and just what you're doing for students is loving them well. And I appreciate that about you. So those are some things I'm going to go process. I haven't fully been able to review my notes and start putting it into my own heart yet. And I think that's going to come out in some ways that are going to be really special.
Yeah, and isn't that such an important part of it, is being able to go?
It is. It takes time to go home and process. You have to do work on the backside.
Right.
If you just take it and don't go reflect, it's too much to absorb. And it's not always even what they say, but it's what they say when you take it in your heart and let God do a little work on it, and then it's almost like he personalizes it for you afterwards.
I love that. That's so great. Joe, what about you? What really stood out for you?
I think on the first day, one of the highlights actually was in the hallways and having a conversation with one of the next gen leaders and being interviewed by her and hearing her questions. And I mean, it was fun and engaging, but hearing her hunger and insight on leadership and just drinking everything in. And I think that was just really exciting to see, both her poise and her confidence, but also just the fact that we're here, we're integrated, that this is a multi-generational experience. And there's so much for us all to gain and to gather. And when we gather together, seeing the leaders from across the globe as well is always fun. It's kind of like this big family reunion and like, hey, I'm from the DR and hey, I'm from Germany. And again, people who in their different contexts are just seeking what it means to lead well is just a really encouraging thing. I think day 2 for me, I just found it so incredibly moving to think of what it means and just hearing this through line of being seen and what it means to be seen and the importance for us as leaders to see people. Amy talking about failure as well. I thought I've done that so often. So so any more wisdom on that I'm going to take. So yeah.
That's so good. And I love too with Will, one thing that I want to really take back with Will was the dream weavers.
Yes.
The dream weavers. And for those that haven't necessarily listened to GLS 24, Joe, you want to just mention a little bit what the dream weaver was inside of Will's stories?
It was just this wonderful piece and where they wanted to do something thoughtful and meaningful for the people that they were serving, to the point where they needed to have a position where someone would think of just something special. And so it didn't have to be expensive, but something that would be meaningful. So he gave the example of a couple who had got married and had a contentious situation with the family and how they gave them a reception and made sure they had a wedding dance. And so just these things which were just so intentional. And they're seeing people as an observation in a distance, and there's a close-up look, and that's what the Dreamweaver was.
Yeah, and using food and experiences to see people in the same way Jesus taught us to really see people. Like, I just love that, and Will made that come to life. I love that. Is there anything that you can notice, like, I want to go lead differently tomorrow because of... Can you guys fill that in? I know we want to take time to process, but is there anything inside your gut? I want to go be different tomorrow because of. Is there anything for you, Craig?
I feel like I think that it put more gasoline on the fire of I care for our people so much. And it's a little bit like my wife, Amy. Like I try to tell her, I try to show her, and I always feel incomplete. I want to do better. And so I want to go back and I want to help our team know how much I value them and how much what they do matters. And I try, and I'm intentional, but I feel like there's more, and it needs to be deeper, more often, more genuine, more sincere. And I can be sometimes too task driven and walk right by someone instead of stopping. And so there was kind of there's several threads, I think, kind of like bringing your all, don't quit, loving and being hospitable, persevering, healing. But all those things kind of work together to a genuine depth of relationship and commitment to the calling into people. So I'm gonna process all that and look forward to seeing, how it brings about change.
Yeah. Just like, what is the next step? What is the next more for you? I like that. Craig, what about you, Joe?
I think the first thing that stood out was that I want to go away and recognize where I need to almost give myself a bit of a break on things. And what it was, I think actually it was Craig when you were talking about the obsessions and what you obsess about. And I thought, how many times have I written myself off for being obsessed about something and like being in a meeting, not bringing that up again, not talking about women leaders again, not talking about integration again, because it seemed like it's a little awkward. And it was so wonderful to hear something about focus. So I think it was almost like, actually, that thing that you're a little bit embarrassed about is actually a gift and a strength. And so I think it was a mindset change that was the first thing that I would be taking away. And a sense of actually stay curious about that and keep leaning into that.
Yeah.
And focusing. And in terms of as I lead others, it was the thing about being seen. I thought, how can I see people better? And how can I embody the seeing? I think that was the piece. Sometimes I'm like, I've done that in conversation, but to see it embodied in such a wonderful, practical and delightful way, that was what drew me as well.
Yeah. There was a lot of, how do we move from transactional relationship
Yes.
to real relationship, which again, Jesus taught us and showed us. But yeah, like how do we slow down, keep cadence with Jesus, and therefore see others really, really well? I really love that. So you guys have been coming to the summit. You've been at the summit many, many years. What is it like? Can you just recall, because there's a lot of people who came for the first time. Can you remember what your first time was like? And do you have any like wisdom they just fire hose of all the information. What was your first time like coming to the summit?
Well, I want to say my first time was not actually coming to the summit. It was following it online for years and following the tweets and the one-liners and the comments and trying to gain everything I could and feeling really annoyed, actually, and envious that I wasn't there.
I feel like that means their marketing was good or bad at the same time. I don't know.
And to hear these one-liners, and I would get curious about leadership, but coming in the room is a whole other experience because I think you see yourself represented and reflected in the leaders around you, and you're all wanting to grow as leaders. And so I think just being in the room was a really powerful thing for me. Just looking around and thinking, we're all here from all around the world. I know there are people who are all around the world. I know I have people online, and we all want to grow as leaders because we want to serve people better. And we're across industries and ethnicities, socioeconomic groups, but we all care about leadership. And I think that was just a really validating and exciting thing for me. My first impression, to be in a space where we could just get down to the in some ways the work of growth, but the opportunity for growth was a really powerful thing.
Yeah, the energy of being with all the different people and feeling seen. Joe, I love that. Craig, can you remember?
Oh, I absolutely do.
Okay.
And so I was coming to the summit before it was called the summit.
Yeah.
And I was in my mid-20s. And for me, Marcus talked today about the difference between a mindset and a mind shift. I had a mind shift, and I would call it, the phrase I use now is I got the gift of disorientation. So I came in and was completely disoriented. It seemed bigger than anything I'd ever been a part of. And the shift for me is, the talk I gave was, you have permission to obsess, which I'm so glad that you now see that your extremes are not by accident, that you have extra because God gave you extra. And what happened to me then is I was just a pastor. We weren't taught in seminary, in the church, we were never taught that we could lead. And so the founder of this conference, in a sense, gave me permission to lead. He didn't use those words, but that's what I walked away with. Like, I can be a spiritual leader. And I'd never had that experience before. Then, being in the room, then there's all the intangibles, which the people that you meet, the experiencing it with your team, going back and processing it, all those things, are added benefits. But it was a wonderfully disorienting experience for me that shifted everything and was the beginning of kind of a whole new journey of leadership and ministry.
That's so fun to hear, Craig, that's part of your story. That
it is my story. It is my story.
Permission to lead because of this.
I started reading the Bible and seeing leadership in there, like He leads me beside quiet waters. The good shepherd
there it is.
Leads the sheep out.
Right.
I'm going, oh wow, I thought we just pastored. And leading is pastoring, right? Leading is spiritual. Like you lead people to a discipled life, and you love them and you pastor them. And so it gave more dimensions to ministry than I knew before.
I love that. And I think when you're saying that, Craig, what I love about that so much is, so then you took that and you took your permission slip to go lead, and then the ripple effects of that. And I think about all the people that just experienced the summit, got to hear from you and all the other excellent leaders, and they're going to go back. And everybody can go back. You guys can go back and see where are your spheres of influence that we each have permission to lead. I love that so much. You mentioned, Craig, how you go back and actually start processing with your team.
Yes.
We don't obviously want to keep this inside of ourselves. No. So how do you guys do that? How do you start processing with other people, with your community, with your teams that you might lead? What does that look like for you? Joe, what about you?
I think for me, the temptation, and times gone by, the temptation would be like, I'm going to change everything, I'm going to do everything, I'm going to do it all right now. And that is exhausting for all involved. So I've learned that sometimes when you come to an experience like this, it's a bit like you get a load of seeds that you plant into the ground. And I need to take the time to reflect on it a bit. I often go for a long walk. What were the one-liners? What were the experiences that stay with me? I'm praying about it, talking with friends about it. Partly because I'm an extrovert process, so I need to talk it out as well. And so, and just say, this was just my takeaway. And then I'm in some ways, I'm asking two questions prayerfully. I'm like, what's God saying to me? What am I going to do about what God's saying to me? And I need both. Because otherwise the overachiever within will come and say, we're going to do this, and this. And some things might be a year from now. So part of the process.
And your team might be saying, I can't do this,
can't
this,
do
and this.
this.
That was so many things.
Like everyone avoids you when you get back from an event just because they don't know what the changes are going to be. Like, oh, we're just not going to talk right now. I'm away washing my hair or something.
Yeah.
And so what I've come to do is to have the time to decompress, have the time to in some ways receive afresh what I've learned, the notes and everything. Take time to go over it, and maybe I'll pick one or two things as I'm feeling led. And for me, it's when I'm asking, what am I going to do about what God's saying to me, then I start thinking about a plan and formulating a plan. But I want to take time. And then then honestly, for me, if I can run out of steam. So I need to make sure that if I'm making that plan, I'm asking myself, what am I doing in the next month? But what's the question I'm going to be asking myself 3 months from now about what I've taken away from this time? What does it mean? What does it mean then? And can I still see the through line, or did it fade? And sometimes it does fade. Right. And so then I want to pick it up again. Right. That's I need to have these ongoing check-in points. Yeah. And so for me, monthly and sometimes quarterly increments just help me stay on track with the things that I felt passionate about.
Do you do those one-on-one? Do you just hold yourself accountable to that, or do you do a check-in with somebody else just out of curiosity?
But both. Yeah. Both. And in different contexts. Some are with a prayer partner, that there's a prayerful side of it, that's the focus, but often with teams and the kind of people who hold you accountable in the best kind of a way. Yeah. I think the kind of conversation partner can matter. And
I think Marcus would call it tough love. The tough love kind of love.
The tough love kind of love. Yeah. And where you've got that kind of relationship where we're not talking just for conversation's sake, although that's a wonderful thing. We want to be intentional about what we're learning. And I have those people in my life. I've learned that those people have kept me out of trouble since my teens, and I'm not letting go of those kind of people. But in moments like this, they're like, okay, we heard you say that was going to change you. What does that look like? And if in a month they're like, you remember that time when you said this thing really changed you? What does that look like? And because we need that. We need people who we're running with. So that's what the process will look like.
Those are good friends and good leaders. Craig, what about you? What does it look like to take this back to all the people that you lead?
It's complicated to answer. One benefit that we have, I couldn't do this always, but we have a lot of our top leaders here. So literally on the van to the airport, we'll be processing then. On the plane, we'll be processing. When we're back in the office on Monday, we'll be processing. So there's that. I'll get home tonight with Amy and we'll talk it through for a while. And then kind of like you, I will probably let it go quiet for a couple of days. I'll put it aside, come back out and revisit it. And then what's really fascinating, Whitney, is there will be some immediate changes, some language things that we talk about. And then what'll happen is there's some things that there'll be a seed that's planted now that it will take years to mature. And I can point back to previous summits. So I heard that then, and like we were introduced to the idea of cultural values, a decade and a half ago. Then we developed them, and then we start driving them and living by them. And so one little talk created an idea that matured, that 15 years later, it resulted in a totally different organization. So there's little changes and there's deep changes, and both those will happen. Some will happen quickly, some will there'll be an idea, then I'll go do a deep dive on the content of a new speaker that I didn't know who that was, read more of her stuff, listen to more of his stuff, and it'll drive deeper. And then I'll start trying to kind of make it my own, not like it's my original thought, but their thought with where we are. And then I'll start teaching it some or explaining it or making changes. And it'll be, 10 years from now, there will be more that comes out of this event that we won't know until the ideas mature.
Absolutely. One thing, 10 years, it led me to kind of just thinking about legacy. And one thing we haven't gotten to talk about yet is how we got to experience what happened with Johnny Erickson Tada on the stage and how beautiful that was. And I don't know about you, but just the tears, just in watching her and the impact of her life. We were able to honor her on the stage for her life. And so she talked a lot about leading from weakness. Is there anything that inside of that, or even just watching her speak or talk through her life story that really, really impacted you about weakness? Was there something for you, Craig?
Well, I mean, number one, she is a legend. We know what she's done. We deal with what I'd call like easier problems. My big problems are easier problems than what she deals with every day. So there is that. Two interesting takeaways for me. One is to talk to her one-on-one. You can see why the greatness has lasted for decades, because she is the most others-focused. You can't. You're trying to compliment. She can't help but pull stuff out of you and ask about you and care about you, and you can't fake that.
So thoughtful.
It's
You can't fake that.
No.
It's inside of her.
And you also can't have a 3-minute conversation without seeing it. Like you know, I can really probably disappoint you quickly in a 3-minute conversation. You know, like that guy's just not whatever. She's so special. And then to take her and Coach K, what I saw there was when you're looking at 4 decades for both of them of faithfulness in their, like in his craft and his, you know, he called it sustained excellence. And you see just the longevity, the duration of integrity is, it inspires me. And it's like going, we can do this. And then to think about handing it off. So it's her whole, who she is, inspires me, how she talks, how she loves, not just what she's overcome, but who she is and how she loves. That's right. Is a deep blessing.
That's right. Yeah.
So good. And such a wonderful visionary leader as well. I think, growing up in the UK, I had heard of Johnny and I'd read, I think, a book and things, but obviously not as much as the Christian community here, but to meet her face to face and to hear the journey and the story, but just the fire in her leadership of what she, and like, don't mess with stats. She's got the stats and the details, and to see what she's done legally for people and what she's done at government level, what she just, again, and like there's this, it's almost a contradiction in terms, but a gentle relentlessness with her. And
yes.
Like that thoughtfulness.
She'll take over everything while she's loving you.
Yeah.
It really is.
And she'll get it done.
She's going to get it. She's going to get it done.
She's going to get it done.
Yeah,
she's going to get it done.
But she is, yeah.
Yes.
And I thought
her organization is giant. I mean, it's massive. Yeah.
And I can see why people want to walk with her and journey with her in leadership, because she is such a phenomenal leader. She's such a phenomenal visionary, and gets you thinking about things that you wouldn't have thought of before.
Not the traditional way you think, which is really inspiring.
Which is wonderful, because then it reminds us how God calls people to lead.
Yes. Yeah. It was almost disorienting. Back to your word of disorienting.
Yes.
Like, oh my gosh, what a beautiful leadership style.
And if she can lead in a very different way, so can you.
Yeah.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
Whatever it is, your uniqueness, your weakness, whatever it is, if she can do it, so can you.
Yes.
I want to end with one personal question. I was just thinking, so when Johnny ended, she quoted, "I have run the good race." This is what feels good to me, knowing that I have run the good race. And it can change, but today in this moment, Craig and Joe, I would love to know, like, you get to see Jesus and you say, "I have run the good race because," and fill in that blank. Craig, what would that be for you?
So I don't know if this is true, but I heard that this would be our last plane trip to take, that I think our bodies, and so to think that she invested her last trip here is really special. It's really special. And the verse that she quoted was my life verse, when Paul said, "I consider my life worth nothing if only I can finish the race, complete the task." And to me, it's family is there, and I'm blessed. My 6 children are grown, married, and all serving in the church, and that's the greatest win we're ever gonna have, ever. And then I'm all about the church, and it was years and years ago where I heard that the local church is the hope of the world, and so I'll take that and I'll say Jesus through the local church is the hope of the world, and so serving the bride of Christ is my calling. It's who I am, what I want to be, and so if I can do that well, finish strong, and then hand it off. Which I used to dread, now I'm excited about. That's going to be special.
Love that. And I see you doing that, Craig. That's really incredible. That's wonderful. Joe, what about you?
I think for me running the race would be the course of history being changed on my family. My background, there are lots of religions in my family, but our generation were the first Christians in the family, and seeing that redemptive piece, I'm like, yeah, I'm good with that. That's just a wonderful. I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful for that. And then I think, I grew up thinking that the church was a change agent, and I think my part of it is has always been in the area of leaders and caring about leaders and making sure that the leaders are well. And it feels in this current assignment, so I'll imagine that that's the long one, has been coming alongside women so that they're freed up to be whatever God's called them to be, wherever he's called them to be it. And so if I can look back with him and he can say, hey, look at all these women who got up and did their thing, whether it was in business, in churches, in nonprofits, in their families, in their communities, and they were seeing the kingdom come in a range of ways. Because you were faithful to what I asked you to do, then I'd be like, okay, I'm pleased with that.
That's so good. Thanks for sharing that with us, you guys. And thanks so much for being with us on the podcast.
Thank you.
Whitney. Thanks.
Thank you for impacting thousands and thousands of leaders.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, so isn't that fun that this podcast community got to hear exactly what Joe and Craig were thinking just after the summit? I think it's so special to know how leaders are processing and what they took in and what they're absorbing and how they wanted to impact their coming years. And one thing that I loved in that conversation, and honestly, that I'm still thinking about from that conversation, is when we were talking about Johnny Erickson Tada and her running her race. And I asked both Joe and Craig, hey, how do you want to run your race? What do you want your legacy to be? And here's the thing, they both had incredible answers, but here's what I loved almost the most is that they had answers. They had responses as to how they wanted to end well. And it's something that I've personally been thinking about. How do I want to end well? What is the race that God is inviting me to run? And do I have an answer for that? And so I invite you, do you have an answer to that? How do you want to run your race? I love that Joe said, listen, there are generational ties in my family that I want to be seen change. I want to see change through my leadership. And she feels so called to women and to see them rise in their leadership development. She knew exactly the direction she's going. And then I love how Craig just immediately said, my family is my legacy. And then he went on to say, which is exactly what we see him doing in his leadership, the local church. He wants to see the local church expand and grow. And again, to me, it was so compelling that they had answers. So I do wonder, how are you running your race? Do you have an answer for that? And one way that the Global Leadership Network wants to come alongside you in running your race is we know that the summit is fabulous 2 days of great content, but we know you're a leader all year long. That's why we've created 365. We have it for both teams and leaders. And right now you can go online and save up to $100 for leadership development content for either you as a leader or for your team. So go and check it out. It's at globalleadership.org/365. And now through September 3rd, you're going to get up to $100 off through September 3rd. Again, we know that you're a leader every single day of the year, which is why we created a product to support you. Thanks so much again for joining us. We love it when you go and subscribe or rate and review the podcast so many others can hear great leadership content. And just remember that everyone has influence, so lead where you are.